Coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD Thrillcast.
Borak Thunga, Flitz, and welcome to the 2000 AD Thrillcast. Now, over the last sort of 10 years or so, the number of people writing Judge Dredd on a regular basis has grown quite significantly. No longer is it just Alan Grant and John Wagner, but we're also joined by creators such as Rob Williams, Al Ewing, Simon Spurrier, Gordon Rennie, and more. One of those is Michael Carroll, who you may well know from his Every Empire Falls stealth epic, which took place in the aftermath of the Day of Chaos, and saw Texas City try to stage a coup and take control of Mega City 1. Mike's now been working for 2000 AD for over 7 years and has brought some interesting new developments to the world of Judge Dredd. He's also the author of The Avalanche, which is the first in a new series of novellas charting the rise of the judges in pre-atomic war America. Prose is something Michael is no stranger to, having worked on the Year One novellas, as well as writing his own superhero series, The Quantum Prophecy. So it was great to welcome him into the sound booth on the 2000 AD Thrillcast to talk about Avalanche and also his career and what he has planned for the future. I want to talk a little bit about judges, because the majority of people who are reading this will know you from your comics work, but you've just we're just about to bring out the novel that you've written. It's the beginning of a new series which charts the rise of the judges. Now, obviously, John Wagner wrote Origins over 10 years ago now. Tell us a little bit about Judges and how the project came about and why you think it's important to visit these early days of the Justice Department regime.
Yeah, well, it came about from a discussion we had a long time ago with David Moore here at Rebellion/Abaddon/whoever about the other books in which we were working with, Judge Dredd Year 1 and Year 2. And I think it's when he mentioned the idea, I'd like to do it's showing the origin of the judges. I do remember at the time I suggested that what would be interesting would be to do a bunch of books set at the very early start, the very early days of Judges, 2030s, and then 2040s, 2050s, and move ahead a decade every now and again, just to see the whole progression leading right up to what would then become Judge Dredd Year 1. And I don't know if we will go down that route. That was just my first idea, but I think it was one of those things that we throw out. It was put on hold for a while, and then eventually David got back to me and said, "Look, we really would like to go ahead with this." And he asked me to effectively take the position of showrunner, if you like, the book equivalent of a showrunner, the line editor. But there was a bit of confusion there because my previous publishers have used the phrase line editor to refer to people who do the copy editing, because they copy edit line by line. So I thought, well, I can do that. I mean, because I know what commas are for and mostly where they go, and I'm very good at spaces. But once we cleared up that confusion and realised what he meant, so David wants me to kind of supervise the overall storyline. So yeah, so that's what we have. So the first one I wrote myself, it's called The Avalanche, and it introduces the judges into a small town in America. I had to make some decisions because you can't just Judge Fargo can't just come along and say, okay, from now on we will have judges on the streets, and they'll already have been trained for 15 years as they are in Dredd's time. Yeah. So we have to start with people who were not trained. And there's a sort of a myth that goes around, it may be true, about the space programs in the States, that the Americans went to great lengths getting their fighter pilots, trained them to be scientists, and the Russians went, oh, okay, and they got their scientists and trained them to be pilots, which theoretically is simpler because you don't really fly the spacecraft so much as you sit there and pray. So I had the idea that for for the new first batch of judges, they would be police officers, they would be lawyers, and so forth. There would be people who have an experience in law enforcement. They would be retrained for a couple of years only, because you can't spend too long sitting on your hands saying, no, the judges are coming soon. Yeah, we just have to teach them how to do this and teach them. So, well, once to get them on the ground running. So I think in Origins, there's a flashback sequence of about 2 panels, which shows the start of the judges. And those 2 panels are basically what the first 3 books are, in a sense. The first judges on the streets.
Okay. What research did you do about kind of the beginning of totalitarian, fascist, authoritarian regimes? Because so much of the kind of origin stuff about Justice Department and the judges is, there was this terrible crisis, eventually they had the atomic wars and everything. Yeah. The cities were uninhabitable because of all the crime and everything. Did you do any research? Did you look at the ways these regimes have formed in the past?
I did. Well, I've always been interested in that anyway, so that was a big thing. And I looked back more at Italy than at Germany for looking for a totalitarian regime. And I learned a lot of horrifying things. But I learned how easy it is for these things to actually come into being. And it's when we were actually writing the first draft, preparing the story, that the current American political situation started to form. Am I being too subtle there? Should I be less? Okay, Trump was running for president,
right?
And I mean, at the time it seemed ludicrous at the very beginning that this could possibly happen, and of course now we know that it did possibly happen. So it is very easy for a political situation to shift quite dramatically without anybody really seeing it coming, because all it takes, as Edmund Burke didn't say, but people think he does, all it takes for evil to prosper is for good people to do nothing. And in this case, with judges, we had, it's just like the situation that America's in is just an extension of the current political situation. It's not that, it's not that something terrible has happened, but it's a lot of good things didn't happen, if you see what I mean. We don't go into politics too in much detail in the story. It is effectively a novella. It's 36,000 words. There's enough. We have enough to give the reader a hint of why the world has gone so bad. But I was very careful. I took great pains to make sure that even when the world is starting to fall around so badly that you need police as brutal and horrifying as the judges, that people still go to the shops. They still watch TV. When the bad times come, they don't come all of a sudden. They creep in. It doesn't come crashing through the windows. It comes creeping in through the floorboards. It's something that happens. So maybe not subtly, but certainly slowly. You accept one small change. You realise, for example, that the police have to be armoured. Then you realise the police have to be armed. And then you realise that the police, perhaps they shouldn't have shot that man just for being brown, but that's okay. We'll let them off because they're not brown. That was politically charged there, you may have noticed. But that sort of thing that's how it happens. It isn't that they come marching up the street with their banners and their flags. It's that, we let it sort of soak in around the sides.
Well, it's something that Michael Burley talks about in his History of the Third Reich, is how gradual erosion of democratic institutions means that people adapt to it very easily. They become much more accepting than if it's a sudden revolutionary change.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And it's something that always struck me about depictions of the beginning of, not depictions, but explanations about the beginning of the judges is, there was this terrible crisis. Bad Bob Boo was very bad. Yeah. And the judges came in and saved America. But, a coup doesn't happen out of nowhere. Yeah. It's part of a much longer process. And funny enough, on a previous episode, we had Mark Russell, who's written the new IDW series, and he touches an awful lot on the erosion, the dismantling of democratic and the failure of democratic institutions. One of the reasons why I think something like Avalanche, it's a very great metaphor title for what we're talking about. one of the reasons why I think Avalanche is very interesting is that when you have an erosion of institutions, new institutions insert themselves. And of course, Justice Department is the ultimate institution. It is the authoritarian bureaucracy. We've been quite political in what we've been talking about so far.
Of course. Yeah, we should throw in some knob jokes.
Well, no. What I was going to ask was how do you balance, particularly when things are so on the nose at the moment, when one is trying to be satirical about a fascist superstate in the future. How do you not step over the line too much? How do you balance the fact that you're writing about a fiction, you telling a good story?
Well, the focus has to be on the story. If you like, the politics is the medium through which the story is permitted to happen. With Judges, the story really is about the first day of in the Avalanche, I should say, it's about the first day of these judges arriving in a small town. 6 judges given to a small town of only 40,000 people, I think. It's not. They're not the very first judges. They're not coming to save the world right now. It is their day. And I was not spoiling too much. In the prologue, the first judge to arrive is actually from that town. So she arrives a day early to kind of, see her family. And when the other judges arrive in the morning, they're told that she's been found dead.
Right.
Murdered. So their first day, they hit the ground running. And they also hit the ground hard. We have a few instances throughout the book of people who are in the legal situation, cops, lawyers, whatever, trying to get to grips. I mean, they know what judges are, they understand, but they haven't experienced it until now. And there's examples of the cops going, well, okay, well, you're here to work with us. And the judges are going, no, from now on, you work for us.
Right.
Things have changed. The first arrests, I think the first arrests that we see, the cops the crooks are demanding they see the lawyers, and the judges are going, no, that doesn't happen anymore. No, you were arrested, and this is your sentence, and there's no parole, there's no comebacks, there's nothing, there's no appeals. This is it, final. And some of the purposes just cannot grasp this because, they're used to the situation where you just climb up and shout lawyer, and you can't do that at the same time, can you? You cram up and you write lawyer in large letters on a piece of paper. So it is the clash of two worlds, which all the great stories are. Not that this is necessarily a great story. Oh yes, it is. Oh well, thank you from the gallery. But
I didn't realise we booked a ventriloquist act. It doesn't really work on radio.
No, it doesn't.
One of the greatest ventriloquists of all time was on the radio.
Well, they say he was one of the greatest. How do we know? Listen, my young Mike, you wouldn't remember this because you're not old enough and you're not Irish. We used to have tap dancing on the radio back home in Ireland. They said it was tap dancing. It could have been the guy tapping his fingers on it. Yes, and he's dead now. But yeah, where were we? Oh yeah, I was
talking about judges.
Brilliant. Yes,
we're so used to the concept of the judges as being these warrior monks. These kind of sexless, well, supposedly sexless, incorruptible enforcers.
Yeah.
But you're talking about a phase where people are transitioning from one state to another, where they are people who are the vestiges of the previous system.
Yeah, exactly.
Having to come into work with a new system. And I'm particularly intrigued by this idea of judges in a small town. Because so often with big, grand historical narratives, you sometimes lose sight of the people on the ground, the people that it's affecting. So was it a very conscious choice to put it in a small town so you could kind of see the sharp end of
absolutely, change? Yeah. The other books in the series, I won't talk about too much of the books. There's 2 more books so far lined up, and both great, by the way. I have to say, I'm very excited. But their books are focusing on big city impact. But I think that if you drop a pebble into the ocean, it doesn't make that much of a ripple. If you drop it into the bathtub, mummy shouts at you. But we, so 6 judges arriving in a small town. It's an imaginary town in Connecticut. it is it's a huge impact because everybody can see them. Maybe, it's like if you grow up in a small town anyway. I think someone stops on the street and says, "I hear your mum got new curtains." In a big town like this, the judges are they don't come unannounced. Everybody knows this is happening. It's a scary thing, and so on. And there is a huge impact. And I think that's it's a better way of showing the effect of the judges because it isn't necessarily a town so small where everybody knows everybody. It is 40,000 people, but everybody hears about it, and there's only one sort of police station, so the cops arrive and the judges arrive and the cops are all, well, what do we even do with these people? Do we give them offices? Who looks after their machinery and so on? Who looks after the bikes? So it is a huge change for everybody. It's just 6 judges. These judges are doing their jobs. Most of them, it's their first day on the job. They've been well trained. They know what they're doing, and they arrive. And then before they get there, one of them has been killed. So they're pretty annoyed, but they can't use that anger. They can't. They've been trained well enough to know that they must treat everybody equally. Treat everybody like a suspect.
Obviously, as you've already said, this is novellas. It's not a full novel, so there's limited space to explore themes like this. But looking ahead at the series, how do you deal with the morality of something like the judges? Because we've talked a little bit about the politics, but then there's a morality. There's human morality in what they are doing, and particularly when applying it to a small town in Connecticut. It's not the big urban spaces. I mean, you see this narrative growing in America of, well, our cities, certain cities are out of control, etc., etc. How do you deal with the basic morality of what they're doing while keeping them human, but at the same time not justifying the system they're now enforcing?
That is the trickiest part of the whole thing. They've got to be people. They cannot just be, I mean, faceless judges are all very well. We do that when we're writing. I've been writing Judge Dredd now for 7.5 years. And a lot of judges are just Judge A, Judge B, Judge C. But with the novel in particular, you have to go inside characters' heads. In this case, there's the the senior judge is Judge Deacon. He is, he's the man, he's in charge, but I also focus a lot on one or two others to show their own reactions. One of them is a former lawyer. He did not come to this from being a cop. He was what we'd call a barrister. He stood up in court and shouted, "Objection, Your Honour, and I think you'll find," and things like that. I don't know all those phrases, but so we have a scene early on where he meets a minor character who actually is from John Wagner's origins, and this guy, our judge, has a heart-to-heart conversation about where do we go from here, and the other fellow tries to get him to go one way, and our judge goes the other way, and so on. But we have to treat them as people first. We give them a past. With the judges, their past is that they were 5 and then they became cadets, and that's all we know about them. These people have a history. The Judge Leandros, who is the one who dies at the very beginning, she comes from this town, the town of St. Christopher. Her 2 older brothers are police officers. Her whole history is being in the force. She was training as a police cadet and then quit because she wanted to become a judge, which of course causes some friction, which doesn't last very long because she gets deaded. So by giving them a past, by giving them history, a backstory of, even if it's only a few words here and there, we show them as people, and that means it's easier then to show how they react to things. I mean, they're all very committed and firmly believe that what they're doing is right. But then this is only one day. Maybe by day 2 they might be going, yesterday was a bit tough, and we were a bit hard on those people for jaywalking, the ones we all executed. But so with the judges of Mega City 1, they're only judges, if you see what I mean. That's the great thing about Dredd. He is only Judge Dredd. Yeah. He doesn't take off his helmet at the end of the day and he becomes, Ralph, who relaxes and sits down and, watches TV for a few hours before he goes to sleep and then gets up and becomes a judge again. Whereas these judges, theoretically they're judges 24/7, but they're still people. So I think that makes it possibly slightly more accessible to new readers. Possibly. I could be wrong. Not being a new reader, I cannot say. But it does give it gives an easier way in than just saying, no, they've trained in an academy that's absolutely brutal and toughest school on earth for 15 years. That's too far from the real world to identify with, unless you went to the Christian Brothers in Dublin. No, that's not true.
We've mentioned it a couple of times. John Wagner and Carl Ezquerra's origins. It was really because Judge Dredd continuity is a many-headed beast, because certainly in the first few years there wasn't any continuity. It was whatever ideas people wanted to come up with. So you had elements like the remains of the police force. You had, I think at one point, there was meant to be a massive dome over the city, or it certainly looked that way.
Yes, there was.
There was no West Wall and all this and the other. With something like Origins, where for the first time John properly set it out and accepted some bits of convoluted continuity, ditched others, explained away other bits. When you're playing in that sandpit, how much does something like Origins influence you? Because you've mentioned essentially these novels are representing two panels that John and Carlos did. But as a writer of these novellas, how do you take something like Origins and spin something different, interesting out of the little details?
Well, Origins covers a huge amount of time. It's the formation of the judges. I mean, it's Judge Fargo's life, effectively. It is not just about this little moment that we picked. So, in effect, I mean, there's not even enough in Origins for us to contradict, let alone enough for us to really build on. It is these particular moments is, as I say, at the start of the judges. That's a snapshot. And what we're doing is building a film, if you like. So it's fine. I mean, I know enough Dredd lore to not go too far, and I'm shepherding the other writers just in case one of them decides to, for example, to introduce the lawmasters, say, very early on. I'll be going, no, because we can't do that, because we know they don't have lawmasters until much later. It is only little things like that that I need to worry about. There is one case that we're being very careful with, is to not actually show Judge Fargo himself. I reference him in the Avalanche, in flashbacks or characters talking about him, but we don't have any direct contact with him. And that was a deliberate decision that I made separately to David, the boss, having made that decision too, because this is not it's not kind of like a Judge Dredd prequel in that sense. We're not trying to show the story of Dredd's dad. This is not the idea of having. Do you remember when there was a suggestion in one of the Batman comics that Thomas Wayne used to dress up as a vigilante bat hero, and I'm going, oh come on. So I don't know whether that was an Elseworlds one or not, but we don't want to do that. Also, Fargo is a mystery. We don't know what he looks like, really. We can kind of work it out, but we keep the mystery there by not showing him. The other characters refer to him. Judge Deacon, who's my main character, he's a personal friend of Fargo, or he thinks himself as a personal friend, but who knows what Fargo thinks? And that's the way I like it. It was that we don't show him, and also the appeal of a good Judge Dredd story isn't always about Dredd. It's about the people. Mega City 1 is as much of a character as anything else, and that should in many ways be true for this story, is that it's about the people that the laws affect, because the law and justice are not the same thing, and there's a join where the two meet. That's where you find the good stories. Maybe either side, maybe of that join, but it's in that region where you find good stories. If a story is purely about the law, that's boring. If it's purely about justice, then you might as well be just vigilantes. But when you have someone like Dredd or Deacon trying to make the law work with the people and trying to make the people work with the law, and not always succeeding, then that's, I think, where you get the fun.
Because you mentioned one element that is missing from these novellas, which of course is Megacity 1, because Megacity 1 doesn't really exist by this point.
Yes.
As somebody who's written Judge Dredd comics set in the current continuity, how much is that an absence? How much have there been moments when you've gone, I wish I could introduce a footsie or something like that?
I have. Well, I've made mentions. There's a minor character in the book who we have one scene from his point of view, because that way we get to see the judges through his eyes. But he is idly thinking about this situation, and he's thinking that all of the cities are they're merging together. There's no more green space in a few years' time. The orbital view of that part of the eastern seaboard of the United States will be grey and not green. The cities are joining together. We're hinting that Megacity 1 will happen. Now, I think you'd need to actually kind of squint and use your imagination to make it happen in the amount of time it takes to get from where we are 2030s to early 2030s to Dredd's, well, even to 2099 when Judge Dredd started. It's not really going to happen. And there's little things like, the population is not going to be 800 million by that stage. Maybe. And even if it was, if the population of Megacity 1 is 800 million and Megacity 1 is so big, the population density is a bit inaccurate.
This is one of the intriguing things, and again, coming back to how continuity can sometimes shackle in a way that you don't want. 800 million for the entire eastern seaboard of the United States. Isn't that far off?
No, it's less population than the Isle of Wight.
Yeah, exactly.
At the moment. I worked out many years ago, I worked out the density, and I realised it should have been somewhere around 80 billion people to make it actually feel crowded.
Good God.
So you'd need to have huge areas that are not inhabited and then little clusters, like little mini cities clustered together where it's all incredible, panicky sky.
So much of the kind of the rapid urbanisation that we're undergoing now and have been undergoing for certainly since the end of the Industrial Revolution. Even after 100 odd years, with huge cities like London, like New York, like steady on, like the kind of Los Angeles conurbation area.
Yes,
you're still only talking tens of millions of people. Even in the biggest ones. So we've got quite a long way to go. I suppose when you nuke half the planet, then the amount of available space kind of
well, that was always my argument, is that the Greenbelt area of the States is probably gone by the time, by Dredd's time. Well, it is, because so everybody crams into and there's nothing to do anymore but basically make babies or something. I don't know what's in the water in Megacity 1, but I think it might be semen. But no, but erase that one. It is we have to kind of squint it out. I think part of the problem really was that 2099 wasn't far enough in the future. Back when it was decided in the earlies, they should have gone for 2199 or 22.
Well, it was over a century in 1977.
You won't even remember the early days, Mike. You're too young. But I
wasn't even born in 1977. So
really, you weren't?
Nope.
Oh, good Lord! I turned 11 in 77, so I was almost 11 when 2008 first came out.
I was born into Thrill Power.
Yeah, so you don't remember what it was like in the bad old days when all we had was Bullet. No, I loved Bullet. I'm not picking on that comic. Okay. It was a good one.
Let's talk about process a little bit, because, like I said, you've written comic books for over 7 years now. For
absolutely, yes.
But you were a novel writer beforehand. You had a successful series, the Quantum Prophecy series of superhero novels. With something like a novella, can you tell us a little bit about the challenges of, you got experience of writing novels, you've got experience of writing comic books.
Yeah.
This is the kind of middle of the Venn diagram of those two things. Can you tell us the challenges about writing novellas set in a world in which you've only written comic books?
Yeah, well, the first one I worked on was Judge Dredd Year 1, and that was very tough at the time because, well, it was quite innovative too. It was quite new to come into that area. But I mean, I've been writing novels for some prose, if you like, for so long that I have no problem switching back and forth now between that and writing a comic script. But it's the way the stories, as you can tell, the way in which a story is told is very, very different. And I think I touched on this before. in other interviews, I think. But the a comic book, it's always a third person perspective. You're always looking at the scene from outside it. With a novella, and a novel, if the writer chooses, the reader is then brought into the story through the eyes of one of the characters, or through multiple characters if they want to switch back and forth. And not even if it's from a first person perspective, it can still be a third person perspective, but you do get to see what, Brad thinks about something and how he feels about things. And in comics, you can only see what the artist draws and what's what words you give them. So you have much more immediacy with a novel, but then you have the disadvantage that with the immediacy, it's very harder. It's very much harder to hide things that you want to introduce later on, little subtle things where you would suddenly realize that, I don't know, that so-and-so was the evil guy all along. With a book, it's quite hard to do that. So, it changes the shape of a story, not necessarily the story itself. If you like, a story is always a journey from point A to point B, like a car journey. With a comic book, you can go the scenic route, but you've got to go the literary route no, that doesn't work. Ignore that analogy. It's like when you're trying to do a bad analogy during an interview. You start off knowing where you're going, but then you realize halfway through that biscuits and raindrops. So, it is a very different discipline. Also, a prose novel is one-dimensional in the sense that it's a stream that happens to the reader. Now, it happens at their own pace, unlike, say, a radio show or something like that, which is also one-dimensional. So it's a one-dimensional feed of a story. But a comic book, you have the spread to worry about. When I'm writing a comic script, I think in terms of what's going to be on which page. So if I'm writing a 6-page Dredd story, I know I need something at the bottom of page 1 that's intriguing enough for them to turn over to page 2. But you can't have any shocking revelation on page 3 because the reader might accidentally glance at that because page 3 was on the right hand side. So you have your shocking revelation on page 4. Or, I say shocking revelation, it could be a plot twist or something. So you don't give away things away. So you have to think in terms of a two-dimensional presentation of a story. Does this make any sense to anybody?
No. It's absolutely fascinating.
I'm not really sure this is coming across
because what I wanted to ask about was structure, because as you've already mentioned, it's more difficult to hide things in plain sight when you are literally having to tell people everything. You are the reader's eyes in a way that you're not in comic books. So, the Chekhov's gun principle, you've got to describe the gun, and people's antenna immediately go, oh, that's interesting that he's described that gun. What
you do with that, I mentioned this in one interview I talked about this recently, is that what you do in that case is you don't describe, oh, there's a gun, but you set up a situation where people, when they find out there's a gun, they're not surprised. So you mentioned that someone has a military history, and maybe they've got medals and a cap from the time they were in the army. Then it's not a great leap to think that they might have kept a gun. That kind of thing. Ultimately, with a novel or with any kind of story, really, you want the readers, when you reveal the twists, you want readers to go, "Ooh, I should have seen that coming," and not, "Where the hell did that come from?" So you can't just introduce something out of the blue and say, "Aha, no, Darth Vader was really your father all along." I don't know why I'm chosen that one. When there's no evidence whatsoever to indicate that such a thing could be true, that's cheating. And in Star Wars they cheated, and I'm sorry, but they did, and I don't care what anybody says. He was making it up as he went along. It is you have to let the readers feel that they were so close to getting it. You never make them feel stupid, and you never make them feel like you're cheating them, because that is just wrong. That's just unfair. So with a Dredd story, if I have a twist, you have to signpost it in some way, but the signpost and the comic can be very subtle. Little thing in the background that you hope that the letterer doesn't put the balloon over. They never do. Annie is my letterer, and she's awesome. So,
what's the value of doing prose about comic books? Because it was tried in the 1990s with the Black Flame stuff.
The Virgin books as well.
And some of those were great, and some of them not so great. That's an entirely subjective point of view.
It's also true.
But what is the value of delving in? Why write prose about a comics universe?
Well, it gives you a different perspective, and that in itself is it makes it feel more real. I mean, one of the most fun books I've read in the past 20-odd years is The Death of Superman by Roger Stern, which is a novel based on the comic story, The Death of Superman. And I got it for £1 in a bargain bookshop and thought, oh, yeah, hey, I'll read this. And I didn't expect it to work, but I loved it.
Right.
And I think that kind of caught me out because I didn't expect something like that to work so well. The Death of Superman in the comics, especially the last issue, if you recall, is it's just a whole series of splash pages. Every page is a splash page. And it looks fantastic. I mean, you read it thinking about 20 seconds, but it looks fantastic. But in the book, that's about 50 pages of prose, and I didn't expect it to work. It worked brilliantly. And I found the same with occasionally with other writers who have dabbled in both comics and in books. Peter David being a great example. He's one of my favourite writers. He writes books that are so effortless to read. And in a way that some people might dismiss them as being, trivial or whatever, but I think they're great. They're just so much fun and there's so much life and depth to them. But life and depth, that sounds like death. Life and depth and death. But with Dredd, when I had the chance to write the year one, I jumped at it because novels are my thing and it's what I love. And I thought, well, this would be a chance to look a little bit inside Dredd's head. We don't do thought balloons in comics anymore. We do thought bubbles, but that's only a convention. I've never been invited. But I'll drop that one in subtly. They might not. But we don't have the thought balloons where, great Scott, I only have a split second to get out of the way before the murderizer's bullets hit me. And because that was just too silly, so that was dropped. But prose allows you to get inside the head of the characters to some degree. I mean, with Judge Dredd Year 1, I did that with showing Dredd's thought processes during the rest at the very beginning. And I had so much fun with that because with Dredd, he is kind of a cipher. He's still a person, but he is. We don't know too much about him. We don't know him the way we know Johnny Alpha, for example. With Johnny Alpha, you know him, like, he wouldn't necessarily be your friend, but you'd be somebody you'd know. Dredd, you wouldn't want him to be your friend. He's just too scary. So the year 1 and year 2 books gave us a chance to get into that, and I did that even greater depth with the Rico Dredd novella singular. And with Rico, I was able to show what Dredd could have been if Dredd had been a person. And I don't mean to dismiss Mr. Dredd, but if he had been more of a human being than a lawman. And with Rico, I was able to do that, and I had tremendous fun with doing that.
The vast majority of your work for us is Judge Dredd, is based in the Judge Dredd universe. Whereas your novels are superheroes.
Well,
by and large, superheroes.
Well, they're neither by nor large.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true. Yes. So I'm kind of fantastical world in both senses.
Why Judge Dredd? What is it that so appeals to you that it's the sandpit that you want to play in, as opposed to, for example, original series for 2000 AD?
Well, I have pitched original series, but they've never been taken up. But no, part of the thing is that it is harder in some ways to write in an established universe than it is to write in in your own universe, because you can make up your own rules. With the New Hero stuff, I made up my own rules, and I wrote 9 good-sized novels and a bunch of short stories for that one, and they were great. But with Dredd, I know there's a very narrow band where stories can exist. There's 41 years of continuity there, and not just Judge Dredd, but there's also all the stories that happen on the side. There's Judge Anderson, there's things like Missionary Man and DeMarco and all of these things. And I've got to know all of that. And I must admit, I do forget from time to time, and I will send a script into Matt with a suggestion for an idea or something, and okay, no, this has been done in such, because his memory is phenomenal. But yeah, I know, I like it. There's also, of course, the great social cachet of being able to say, hey, I write Judge Dredd.
Right.
And women just throwing themselves away from me on the streets. Yes, No, it is a, I don't know, I couldn't imagine ever willingly stopping writing Dredd. I'm always going to have more to say, I think, because, as again, the real star, the real character is Mega City 1 and all the crazy things that happen there. And then, it is a constantly evolving thing. It's ever changing. We have, the Day of Chaos was a great example of how, we all got used to the status quo until the status was no longer quo, or perhaps the quo was no longer status, said he, not knowing Latin, but trying to fake it. And that shook everybody up, and all of us writers were like going, well, now what do we do? And I think some of my best stories came out of that, because, adversity breeds, soldiers. No, stories, no, something. Yeah. You raise to greater heights by climbing over obstacles.
Well, of course, Every Empire Falls, that was the name of the collection.
Yes.
But the stories that make up that, very much grounded in that kind of new dynamic, the new status quo, where Mega City 1 is weak in a way that it has never been before. One of the things I found fascinating, and I wrote about it in the Mega Collection features, was the contrast over the course of about 15 years between the kind of stories that Gordon Rennie was writing in the magazine, so Regime Change, where Mega City 1 is very much acting like the George W. Bush regime was acting at the time, which is projecting their power onto the regime. Yeah. But then within the space of 10, 15 years, they're having a taste of their own medicine. It's other city-states that are imposing their will.
Well, exactly. Every Empire Falls. The title wasn't chosen by me, but it was actually a line from the comic. I originally called it Reclamation. But if you look at that story as a whole, it's all to do with getting comeuppance for past actions. We saw that with where Rico and Coburn are out in the Cursed Earth, and they meet the tribe of Native Americans, who are basically going, well, this is not your land to defend. It's not the enemy's land to plunder. This is, and always has been, our land. And of course, at the same time, we have the parallel story of Judge Joyce in Beset. Every empire falls, and every empire that falls leaves behind a legacy of people going, well, hang on, your ancestors did this to my ancestors, therefore I must hate you and kill you for this. So that's what's happened in Mega City 1, I think, after Chaos Day. I mean, it's arguable that they deserved what happened in Chaos Day. No, admittedly not argument by me, because I think it would be a wrong argument, but it's still, I can see the point of view of the people who would make that argument. That the Mega City 1 was a bully, and it said, well, this is the way things should be, and they threw their weight around, and the Sovs or certain factions went, no, and here is, your comeuppance for that. And now Mega City 1 is on its knees going, we were big once. We had an empire. Let us try to hang on to the last vestiges of this as long as we can. Cough, Brexit, cough.
This might be a bit of a stretch. In growing up in Ireland, I don't know whether your childhood was affected by what was going on at the time with Northern Ireland. Do you think that gives you a certain perspective on imperialism, on colonialism, on issues like that, where you're not necessarily coming at it from the point of view of British writers satirising another state, but you are a state that has been satirised in that very comic?
Yeah, well, we grew up growing up in the 70s, I was born in 66, so by the time I was able to think for myself, it was, well into the 70s or 80s. But it was, we were used to seeing news reports about how horrible things were in Ireland, and we're going, no, Northern Ireland, and also that's Britain, so it's not like it's bad in our country, it's your country. But we also grew up with a constant sense of being the underdog. Now, admittedly, the Irish people love being the underdog because they've got a position to stand and fight from. But every comedian in the 70s or in the early 80s even, before the alternative comedy hit the scene, when they were telling a joke about someone who was thick, they would put on the Irish accent. You wouldn't even have to say two Irishmen went into a bar. You would just throw in the accents. And so we grew up with the British media feeding us this, and that's fine. But it's punching down. And when if you're punching down, someone sooner or later, they're going to punch back. And this is me punching back. But given that most of my friends tend to be British of some sort, whether that means English or Welsh or Scottish or Northern Irelandish, I'm sure they've got a special name for them over there. Actually, there is a special name for them, but we're not allowed to use it on podcasts. But I'm at the stage now where I'm fine. I don't have any animosity towards what happened to my ancestors. But there are people who are my age who do, and they still take it very seriously. And there are people my age who would not, for example, come here, would not be hopefully friends with someone like you. I hope we're friends at this stage. But, because they would feel hurt. They would feel that they were betraying their legacy. But that's true of every nation where there has been some kind of strife or subjugation. I know Scots people who won't talk to English people. I know Welsh people who won't talk to English people. I actually don't know any English people who will talk to English people either. No. So we grew up in Ireland where we had our independence, but we were still. Me and my parents didn't grow up in the Republic of Ireland. When they grew up, it was the Free State. It wasn't a republic until 1949, I think. And their parents grew up, but their parents were basically British citizens. My grandfather on my mother's side was born in 1910, so he was subject of His Majesty. And it says so on all his documentation. It was the way it was. So younger generations, younger people don't know any of this, and nor should they. But it behooves us older people to harp on about it without stopping forever. As long as we get a few kicks in every now and again.
Let's look to the future a little bit, because you're working on something. Without going into too much detail, you're working on new Dredd comics at the moment.
I am. Yeah, I have started a new thing that will hopefully at some stage become a saga, as it were. I remember with Every Empire Falls, someone described it as a stealth saga, which I thought was a clever name for it. This is a story it starts off as a 4-parter, and it's all I will say is that it introduces a certain situation that will somewhere down the line pay off. I wish I could say more than that. But before that, though, I must throw in something I'm very excited about. I don't know if you're thinking about the same thing. There's a young, fresh new artist called John Higgins on the scene. And John and I have collaborated on Razorjack Dredd crossover. Razorjack being a character that John created back many years ago. His own self-created character, because John writes and draws and colours and everything. He's multitasking and multi-talented. Yeah, so Dredd versus Razorjack crossover, which has got, okay, I'm going to say it, the best comic book art I have ever seen. It is phenomenally good. And if you don't believe me, then you're wrong. I believe me, and I've seen it. So, hey. Because
we had a preview strip that ran in the magazine.
Yeah, that was called A Glimpse of Summer, which is it was a one-off sort of standalone tale, Razorjack tale that was published alongside the graphic novel there 3 or 4 years ago. And because John wanted to do a new Razorjack story, and he asked me for some ideas, and I threw this out. But it had never been seen outside the graphic novel, so we thought, well, we'll see. It doesn't necessarily fit in directly with the Dredd story, but it gives you an idea of what Razorjack's minions are capable of doing. They are absolutely vicious, unstoppable warriors. Except, of course, the good guys always win in the end. Don't worry, they do get stopped. But that's the Razorjack story. Dredd. It's coming in the next magazine, I think. It's 3-parters, and I've seen the art for the first 2 parts. It is absolutely stunning. I mean, John is, to my mind, the greatest comic book artist ever, including the future. And I will fight to the death anybody who says otherwise, as long as they are smaller and weaker than I am. I think that's a pretty good statement there. But also coming up, there's also, are we allowed to? Yeah, we're allowed to talk about we're doing another crossover. No way. Yes, way. Really well. Yes, we are. There's a 5-part crossover coming up in 2000 AD, which introduces the world of judges in a comic book form. So it's a story featuring Judge Deacon from the Judge's book, and that's coming up in, it should be 3 or 4 weeks, I think. My sense of time is so poor, but about 3 or 4 weeks when the book is available. That's a good one. I think you'll like that.
In terms of your future as a writer, where do you see yourself going now? Because you've, like I said, you've worked on Judge Dredd for over 7 years now. You've written novels, you've written novellas. Are there challenges that you would like to take on in the coming years?
Yeah, I have. I do have a specific movie that I want to write, but then everybody has a movie they want to write. but mine is actually a good one. I have a very strong idea for a movie that I'd love to do one day, but it's a matter of actually setting aside enough time to do it, a block of time. I'm currently working on a novel series that I'm not actually allowed to talk about. Other than that, it's a novel series, but it'd be one of those ones that when it comes out, people are going to be going, ooh. But it's not in the 2000 AD where there's no connection whatsoever. But it's one of those ones that people will be, some people will be very angry about, but some people are going to be very excited about. So that's taking up a huge amount of time at the moment. But beyond that, I mean, I love what I'm doing. I expect to retire any day now from massive wealth. I'm now 52. I expect to be retired by the time I'm 52 and a half. But no, I'm loving it. I think it's great fun. It would be nice to get a big deal, to get, one of the big American books, but I can't see myself ever working for someone like Marvel, unless it was on a one-off thing here and there, because I can't follow the comics anymore. It's not that I'm too old. It's just that I don't have the time to read all these multi-part mad event sagas that happen every couple of months, and I can't remember which characters are dead at the moment and which ones aren't. It's too hard. So what I do, I just buy all the trades when they come out. I can't follow them on a month-to-month basis. DC, I'll probably have a better chance of getting in there, but I could see myself working for someone like Image or Dark Horse or someone like that. Oh, Dynamite. Go back to Dynamite if that had me. They were good.
Well, thanks very much to Mike for taking the time to pop in and have a chat. Absolutely fascinating. Looking forward to what he's coming up both in the prog and in prose. Please don't forget that if you enjoy the 2000 AD Thrillcast, we'd really appreciate it if you nipped along to iTunes or the podcast app of your choice and left us a rating and a review. It all helps skew the algorithms in our favour, Earthlets. So let people know what you think about the fortnightly Thrillcast. Join us again in 2 weeks' time when we're going to be beaming some thrill power back into your aural sensors on the 2000 AD Thrillcast. Splendid Verthrig, Earthlets.
Alert! 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 Thrill power levels dangerously high. Alert! Alert! Read 2000 AD every week. Ask your comic book store or newsagent now. Subscribe to the galaxy's greatest comic at 2000adonline.com. Subscribe digitally on our apps for Apple, Android, and Windows 10. And download DRM free copies from 2000adonline.com. Alert! Alert! Stand by for urgent updates. Search for 2000 AD on Twitter and Facebook. Watch the latest videos at youtube.com/2000 AD online. And follow on Instagram at Insta2000 AD. Program complete. Shutting down.